The grand halls of Hawthorne Manor, once vibrant with lavish parties and family gatherings, now stood heavy with silence. Dust clung stubbornly to the ornate chandeliers, and the scent of aging roses drifted through the stale air. It was under this roof, amid fading grandeur, that the Hawthorne family assembled for the funeral of their matriarch, Margaret Hawthorne. From the outside, it looked like a picture-perfect reunion. Sons, daughters, spouses, and grandchildren gathered in somber black, offering tight embraces and whispered condolences. But beneath the surface, the gathering was a theater of resentment. Eyes flickered with suspicion, smiles stretched too thin, and old wounds bled silently beneath polished appearances. Margaret had known it would be this way. She had spent her final months preparing for it. After the service, the family shuffled into the wood-paneled study for the reading of the will. The air was electric with anticipation. Each member, from Charles, the eldest and most entitled, to Alexandra, the estranged daughter who hadn't visited in years, harbored their own expectation of what they were owed. They had come not for closure, but for spoils. On the massive mahogany desk sat a sleek black laptop. The family attorney, Mr. Redgrave, pressed play. Margaret's face flickered onto the screen, regal even in death, her sharp gray eyes glinting with a knowing cruelty. "If you're watching this," she began, voice crisp and cold, "then I have finally left this world, and left you exactly what you deserve." A murmur rippled through the room. Unease tightened like a noose. "You see, I realized long ago that love meant nothing to most of you. You abandoned me when I needed you most, so now I leave you a choice. If you want my fortune, you must first unearth your own sins. Confess them, publicly, brutally, without reservation." Gasps and angry whispers erupted, but Margaret's steely voice cut through them. "Hidden within this house are clues. Each one will reveal a truth you would rather stay buried. Only those willing to confront their demons will move forward. The rest? You may leave now and receive nothing." The screen went black. Silence fell, thick, suffocating. It was no longer a funeral. It was a game, and Margaret Hawthorne was still playing from beyond the grave. The study remained thick with stunned silence as the first clue was handed out. A delicate yellowed envelope, sealed with Margaret's personal crest, a coiled serpent. Inside, a single sentence was written in Margaret's unmistakable hand. "Look where greed met silver and rot took root." It didn't take long for the family to descend into murmuring speculation. Silver? Greed? Was it literal? Metaphorical? Charles, always eager to seize control, marched out of the study, leading the others through the sprawling estate like a man possessed. The trail led to the once grand dining room, a cavernous space where countless family feasts had been held under Margaret's scrutinizing gaze. At the center stood the massive oak table, its surface now dulled by time. Beneath the tarnished silver serving trays and cracked porcelain, tucked away inside a hidden compartment, Charles found a weathered leather ledger. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages, and color drained from his face. The ledger, meticulously compiled by Margaret herself, documented every shady transaction Charles had orchestrated over the past decade. Forged documents, shell companies, hidden accounts offshore. He hadn't just drained the Hawthorne family business, he had gutted it, selling off pieces of the empire while blaming bad investments and unlucky markets. Margaret had known it all. She had even annotated his crimes in neat red ink. Greed will devour its own. A sharp, satisfied gleam entered Alexandra's eyes as she snatched the ledger from Charles's hands and read aloud the most damning passages, her voice dripping with theatrical outrage. Gasps filled the room. Charles's wife, Evelyn, looked away in shame, while David, his younger brother, muttered a string of curses under his breath. Cornered and exposed, Charles stammered, I did it for the family, to protect us. You think any of you could have done better?" But no one rushed to his defense. Margaret's voice from beyond echoed in their minds, "Confess, or forfeit everything." With nowhere to hide, Charles fell to his knees before the ruined family portrait that hung above the fireplace. Eyes glistening with rage and humiliation, he managed to croak out a half-hearted confession, but the damage was done. His fall from grace was only the beginning. The Hawthorne legacy was beginning to rot from within, and Margaret was just getting started. The fallout from Charles's confession still hung in the air like a rancid fog, but Margaret had not designed her posthumous game to allow the family a moment's peace. As soon as the ledger was locked away, a grim trophy of shame, Mr. Redgrave handed over the next envelope. This time, the clue was simpler. A photograph, yellowed and creased with age. It depicted the master bedroom in Hawthorne Manor, but in the mirror's reflection, barely visible, two blurred figures entwined in a secret embrace. The room stirred with uneasy whispers. Alexandra paled. Evelyn, Charles's wife, went rigid. David, Charles's younger brother, stared at the photo for a long, dangerous moment. As if pulled by a magnet, the family made their way to the master bedroom, Margaret's old domain. Dust danced in the shafts of light slanting through the heavy velvet curtains. The grand four-poster bed stood like a tomb to better days, draped in decaying finery. Hidden beneath the mattress, inside a sealed envelope, they found a letter written in Margaret's sharp, unyielding script. Infidelity is the silent blade that severs bloodlines. Those who took comfort in each other's arms behind another's back will now take blame in the eyes of all. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. Margaret had known, perhaps for years, about the affair between Evelyn and David. The confession burst forth like a dam breaking. Evelyn, cornered by suspicious glares and sharp words, broke first. Tearfully, she admitted that the affair had begun when Charles became consumed by his, quote, business ventures, leaving her lonely and bitter. David, always lurking in Charles's shadow, had offered a sympathetic ear, and eventually much more. The worst cut of all? The affair hadn't been a fleeting mistake. It had lasted for years, conducted right under Charles's nose. Even in the rooms of this very house, Charles's face twisted with a mix of rage, betrayal, and humiliation. Without warning, he lunged at David, fists flying, decades of resentment erupting into savage violence. It took two of the younger cousins to pull them apart, leaving both men bloodied and breathless. In the doorway, Alexandra smirked coldly. "And to think," she murmured, "this is only the beginning." Margaret's plan was working perfectly. The Hawthorns were unraveling, thread by filthy thread, and their matriarch watched from the grave with silent, merciless satisfaction. The family gathered once more in the darkened study, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The latest clue, a carefully folded, time-worn envelope, was placed before them like a grim offering. The seal, once crimson, had long since faded to a dull brown. Inside, a letter awaited, its message a chilling continuation of Margaret's cruel game. Death is but the beginning of the truth, and the past is never truly buried. The words hung in the air, heavy with foreboding. For a moment, no one moved. Margaret's husband, Thomas Hawthorne, had passed away under mysterious circumstances nearly 2 decades ago, his death ruled as a tragic accident. A stroke, the doctors had said, but Margaret, ever vigilant, had never bought the official story. She had always suspected foul play, something her children had refused to entertain. And now, it seemed, Margaret was determined to make them face what they had all buried so long ago. Mr. Redgrave, without a word, opened the study doors, leading them down the long, familiar hallway to the family's old library. There, beneath a loose floorboard, they found a rusted tin box, locked tight. The key, as it turned out, had been hidden in the most unlikely of places, the very pocket watch Thomas had worn the night of his death. As the key clicked open, the family recoiled in shock. Inside the box were photographs, grainy and old, showing Thomas's final moments in the days leading up to his death. But it wasn't just a tragic image of a man fading into illness. There were other images, disturbing images. Margaret had caught something no one had realized. A shadowed figure standing by Thomas's bedside in the dead of night. Someone unseen, someone whose identity was hidden by darkness. But Margaret had known. She had always known. And then, buried beneath the photographs was a letter from Thomas himself, written in his shaky hand, moments before his death. "I didn't want to admit it, but I fear what I've discovered. Someone in this house is responsible for my death. They've been poisoning me slowly, and I suspect they've done it before. but they will get what they deserve one day. I just hope I can find the courage to confront them before it's too late." The room fell into a stunned silence. The impossible question now loomed: had one of them killed their father? Was there a murderer among them? Charles's face was drained of color. He had been Thomas's confidant, his protege. He was the one who had convinced Thomas to invest in a disastrous business venture, one that ultimately led to the family's financial ruin. But was that all? Had Charles's desperation to cover up his failures driven him to something far worse? Evelyn's eyes darted around the room, sweat beading on her forehead. She had been Thomas's nurse during his final days, the one to administer his medication. Had she unknowingly played a part in the slow, fatal poisoning? David stood frozen, his eyes darting back and forth, as if he might find some sign, some hint of innocence. But his own dark past, his affair with Evelyn, now seemed like a prelude to deeper betrayals. And Alexandra, the youngest, the outsider, stared at the photographs without emotion. She had always been the black sheep of the family, ignored and dismissed. Could she, too, be hiding a secret far darker than anyone had imagined? The house seemed to breathe in unison with their panic. Shadows lengthened. Margaret's final act, this revelation, had cracked the Hawthorne family wide open. The cracks were widening, and there was no turning back. The reading of Margaret's will had become a slow-moving train wreck. Each revelation pulled at the threads of the Hawthorne family, unraveling everything they once thought they knew about each other. And now, with the latest bombshell about Thomas's death, it felt like a powder keg had been ignited. There was no going back. The family gathered once more in the grand dining room, the table set as it always had been, a symbol of their former unity. But now, as they sat in their places, it was as though the room itself had become a battlefield. Charles, still reeling from the earlier revelations, slammed his fist onto the table, sending silverware clattering to the floor. His face was contorted with rage. "You think you can just accuse me of murder? Of ruining everything we built?" he spat, his voice shaking with fury. "I did what I had to do to save this family, to save the company." Evelyn, seated across from him, shook her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. You think you can just sweep everything under the rug? We've been living in the wreckage of your decisions for years." Their argument was a volley of accusations and hurtful words, long-buried resentment spilling into the open like a flood. For the first time, it seemed that the mask of civility was slipping. Their past wasn't just buried in secrets. It was a living, breathing entity, fueled by years of suppressed bitterness. David, standing in the corner, watched the exchange with cold detachment. As the youngest, he had spent his life living in the shadows of his older brothers, but now he found himself filled with a sick sense of satisfaction. The truth was finally out. He had always known there was darkness beneath the surface of the Hawthorne family, but now that it was spilling into the light, he wasn't sure how to feel. "Enough!" yelled Alexandra, slamming her palms onto the table. Her outburst silenced the room, but her voice was laced with venom. "You're all so quick to point fingers at each other, but no one has mentioned what I know, what I've seen." The room fell deathly silent as all eyes turned to her. Alexandra had always been the wild card, the one who kept to herself, who hid behind the quiet curtain of disinterest. But now, she was holding something that could change everything. "You think you know everything about me? About my loyalty to this family?" Alexandra continued, her eyes narrowing. "But I remember things Margaret never told you, things none of you could have possibly imagined." The others stared at her in confusion and disbelief. "What do you mean?" Charles demanded, his voice tight. "The deal Thomas made with you, Charles. You weren't the only one he relied on." Her words struck like a blow, and her expression was one of bitter satisfaction. "I know you, Charles. You think you've covered up all your mistakes, but I see the truth. You're not as clever as you think." Charles's face turned crimson with shame and fury, but before he could speak, David interrupted, stepping into the fray with a smirk. "This is rich. You're all like children fighting over a toy that none of you deserve." The tension was palpable, each person poised on the edge of an emotional collapse. But it wasn't just words being exchanged anymore. Each sibling carried their own shame, their own guilt, and with every accusation, every revelation, they felt the ground beneath them shift. It wasn't long before the words escalated into something far worse. As Charles lunged toward David, fists flying, the room exploded into chaos. Furniture was upturned. The plates on the table shattered. The sound of shouts, fists landing, and cries of frustration filled the once pristine room. In that moment, it wasn't just their family's legacy that was crumbling. It was their very sense of self. David managed to shove Charles off of him, but not before landing a solid punch to his jaw, sending Charles stumbling backward into the wall. Evelyn screamed, rushing between them, but the damage had been done. The fight had shattered whatever facade of civility remained. Alexandra, her arms crossed over her chest, stood apart from the chaos. Her expression was one of grim satisfaction. It was clear that she was enjoying the spectacle. The house seemed to hum with tension, as if the walls themselves were watching, waiting for the final act to play out. In the corner of the room, Lily, Margaret's grandchild, who had remained silent up until this point, watched it all unfold. She had been on the sidelines of this family drama for years, but now, with each word spoken, each fight escalating, she could feel the weight of the legacy closing in around her. The battle for the inheritance was far from over, but now, more than ever, it felt like nothing was worth fighting for. The air in the study was heavy, thick with the weight of the family's unraveling secrets. The argument had subsided for the moment, leaving a tense quiet in its wake. But there was something else in the air now, something darker than the accusations and lies, a question that hung like a specter over the room, waiting to be answered. Lily Hawthorne, once the overlooked grandchild, had remained strangely silent throughout the chaos. The truth of her parentage, hidden for so long, was now about to be exposed. Margaret's will had contained one final, devastating twist. The document read in part, "There is one among you who has lived in the shadows of this family. You have been a stranger in your own home, a mere pawn in a game you didn't know you were playing. The truth of your birth will be the final reckoning." It was as though time itself had frozen. All eyes turned to Lily. She was the youngest, the one who had always been treated like an outsider, the one Margaret had kept close, yet distant over the years. She had been the only one to visit Margaret regularly in her final years, and for reasons no one could quite grasp, Margaret had trusted her. Now, Lily stood at the center of it all, the whispered rumors of her true heritage beginning to take form in the starkest of ways. Lily's heart pounded as the family's gaze fixed on her. "What does this mean?" she asked softly, her voice trembling as she held the edge of the letter tightly in her hands. Her words hung in the air, but they were drowned out by the mounting tension. Charles, his face twisted in disbelief, was the first to speak. "What is this nonsense? Lily, you're Margaret's grandchild. We've all known you for years. What could possibly—" But before he could finish, Evelyn, whose face was ashen, cut him off. "No, this can't be right." Her voice faltered as she glanced nervously at David, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. She had always been distant toward Lily, but this revelation made her heart race with panic. Margaret had always been a woman of secrets, and Evelyn could feel the weight of them pressing in on her chest. Was it possible? Could Lily truly be someone else's daughter? Lily's hands clenched the letter tighter, the words from Margaret's will echoing in her ears. "The truth is buried, and it is only you who will bring it to light. You, my precious grandchild, are not a Hawthorne by blood." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. There was an audible gasp from Alexandra, who had been sitting in the shadows, watching the drama unfold. She knew there was something off about Lily, something that never quite fit. The girl had always been quiet, observant, but had always been treated like the true heir to the family. But now, the truth was clear. Lily, the outsider, was the product of a forbidden love affair between Margaret and her estranged brother-in-law, Thomas's sibling, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel had been exiled from the family for reasons no one had ever been willing to discuss. Yet Margaret, in the depths of her own loneliness and bitterness, had turned to him in secret, the affair producing a child they both swore to protect and keep hidden. Lily's blood ran cold as the truth settled over her like a heavy cloak. I'm not a Hawthorne," she whispered, barely able to breathe the words. The family stood in stunned silence, staring at Lily as though she had just turned into a stranger. For all these years, they had seen her as part of the family, her name etched into the Hawthorne legacy. But now, with Margaret's will unmasking the truth, it was as though the very foundation of their world had shifted beneath them. Lily's place in this family had never been clear. She had been treated as a distant relative, a quiet observer, never truly part of the power struggles or the bitter sibling rivalries. But now, with this revelation, she was more than a mere bystander. She was the true heir to everything: the wealth, the legacy, the mansion that had once belonged to Thomas and Margaret. Charles's eyes burned with fury. "This is absurd. You're telling me that she, asterisk he spat, pointing at Lily, is the rightful heir? She's just a child, a bastard child no less." But Evelyn, suddenly pale, took a step back. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Lily, this is impossible." Lily's entire world was turning upside down. What had once been a quiet, unspoken truth was now out in the open, and with it came the weight of 1,000 expectations. She had never known her true parentage, never known that she was the result of a forbidden love that had tainted the Hawthorne name. The other Hawthornes watched her, a mix of envy, resentment, and disbelief clouding their eyes. No one knew what to say, what to do, but one thing was clear: Lily now had the power to claim the Hawthorne fortune, and the future of the family was hers to decide. The atmosphere in the Hawthorne estate had grown colder, the shadows lengthening in every corner of the once grand home. The family's fragile alliances were now shattered, their sins exposed for all to see. But the true test had only just begun. Margaret's final message to her family was not one of reconciliation, but of reckoning. And the prize, the elusive fortune they all coveted, was still somewhere within their reach, if they were willing to play Margaret's twisted game. The will's final clause was simple, yet impossible to ignore. Only those who purge their hearts and confess their deepest sins will be able to find the treasure. The map I have provided leads the way, but it is only those who dare confront their past who will succeed in the end. Lily held the will in her hands, her fingers trembling as she read the words aloud. For a moment, the others remained silent, their eyes locked on her, each one knowing that this treasure, the one Margaret had kept hidden for so long, was no longer just a rumor. It was real, and it was theirs for the taking. But the hunt for the fortune would not be easy. Margaret had been meticulous in crafting her challenge, leaving a trail of cryptic clues designed to tear apart what remained of the family's unity. The map she had provided was an ancient thing, its edges curled and faded, stained with age. It was unclear whether the map was truly accurate or if it was just another one of Margaret's games. But one thing was certain: the estate held secrets, and the treasure, whatever it might be, was buried deep within. Charles was the first to speak, his voice tight with frustration. "This is insane. This game, this mockery of a family. Margaret's playing us for fools. We need to find the treasure, end this charade, and take what's ours." David, standing across from him, gave a wry smile. "If you're so sure it's yours, Charles, then why don't you take the map and lead the way? The rest of us can just follow." The animosity between the brothers simmered just beneath the surface, their old rivalry once again coming to light. But neither Charles nor David made a move. They both knew this hunt wasn't just about a fortune, it was about survival. The estate, once a symbol of their wealth and power, was now a battleground, a place where they would have to confront everything they had buried, both in the past and in their hearts. Evelyn, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke next, her voice trembling. "We should stick together. There's no telling what's waiting for us in that house. We don't know what Margaret left behind or what she expected us to find." But Alexandra, always the one to stir the pot, shot back. "You're just afraid, Evelyn. You've been living in Margaret's shadow your entire life, and now you're scared that whatever she's hidden will finally expose all your secrets. You've been complicit in all of this." The room grew tense as Evelyn recoiled, her face paling. The truth of Alexandra's words hit harder than anyone expected. The family's darkest deeds had been buried for years, but now those sins would come crawling to the surface. Lily, still holding the map, finally spoke. "Maybe we should stop arguing and start searching." Her voice, though calm, carried a weight of authority that even the others couldn't ignore. As much as they despised her new position as the rightful heir, there was something in her calm demeanor, in the strength she had gained from Margaret's revelations, that made them pause. The map was more than just an artifact. It was the key to everything. But it was also a puzzle, one that only those willing to confront their darkest fears could solve. The clues were scattered across the estate, hidden in plain sight, wrapped in riddles and cryptic symbols. And as Lily unfolded the map, she realized the first step was deceptively simple. Find the room where Margaret's secrets were kept. The family began their search in silence, each of them retreating to their own part of the house, their minds filled with the heavy burden of their past mistakes. The walls of the Hawthorne estate seemed to close in around them, the very air thick with the weight of their shared guilt. As they combed through the house, David found himself drawn to the old attic. It had been a place of mystery and legend among the Hawthornes, a room that had long been sealed off from the rest of the family. Few dared to venture there, for fear of what they might uncover. But now, David couldn't resist. The attic, he thought, was where the truth was waiting. The truth that would finally break him free from the family's tangled web. Charles, meanwhile, went straight for the basement, convinced that it held the key to the treasure. The dark, damp space seemed to call to him, beckoning him to uncover its hidden secrets. He was desperate, willing to do anything to claim the inheritance that was rightfully his. Evelyn and Alexandra, for their part, searched the study, the room that had once been Margaret's sanctuary. It was here that she had spent her final years, poring over documents, writing letters, and meticulously planning her final act. Evelyn's hands shook as she examined Margaret's desk, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her own sins were tangled in the very papers she now sifted through. But it was Lily who, almost by instinct, found the first clue. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the library, she uncovered a small, intricately carved box. Her fingers hesitated for just a moment before opening it, and inside, she found a key, an old, tarnished key that seemed to glow with a strange, otherworldly energy. Lily knew, without a doubt, that the key was the first piece of the puzzle. But what did it unlock, and what would they discover next? The search had only just begun, and with each new clue, the family's secrets grew darker. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that the fortune they were hunting for might be nothing compared to the truth they would be forced to confront. The haunting silence of the Hawthorne estate was shattered only by the muffled footsteps of the family members, each moving through the dark corners of the mansion, determined to unravel the mystery that had consumed them. The search for the hidden fortune had already begun to tear at the very fabric of their relationships, but now it was about to unearth something far darker than any of them could have imagined. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the house grew more oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing in on the family. Each room felt colder than the last, as though the house itself was alive with secrets that had been buried for decades. Lily, still clutching the key she had found in the library, was drawn to a part of the estate she had never seen before. It was a narrow, forgotten hallway that led to a small, unremarkable door at the far end. There was something about it, a feeling of dread she couldn't shake. Something told her that this door held the answers. Answers that would either bring her freedom or destroy her completely. She hesitated for only a moment before pushing the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, but as Lily stepped inside, her eyes were immediately drawn to a large, dust-covered chest in the corner of the room. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and forgotten memories. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized that this was no ordinary room. This was a room filled with remnants of the past, things Margaret had clearly kept hidden, things no one was meant to see. But it wasn't just the chest that caught her attention. There, half hidden beneath a faded rug, was something far more disturbing. A bloodstain, old and faded, but unmistakable. The stain had soaked through the rug, seeping into the floorboards beneath, as though it had been there for years. Lily's heart raced as she bent down, brushing the rug aside to reveal the full extent of the dark mark. It was then that she noticed something else. A small, brass plaque embedded in the floor, just beneath the stain. She crouched down, her fingers trembling as she traced the letters carved into the plaque. Remember what was done. Before she could process the meaning of the words, the door behind her creaked open, She spun around to find Charles standing in the doorway, his face pale, eyes wide with shock. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice low, almost a whisper. His gaze flickered to the stain, and then to the chest in the corner. I didn't know this room existed." Lily's heart skipped a beat. She had known that Margaret's will had hidden secrets, but she hadn't realized just how deeply the darkness ran. "We need to know what happened here," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. The truth was slowly coming into focus, and it was uglier than she had imagined. Charles took a step forward, his face set in grim determination. "We need to open that chest. It's the only way we'll get answers." But as he reached for the chest, Evelyn's voice echoed from the hallway. "What are you two doing in there?" The three of them turned to find Evelyn, David, and Alexandra standing in the doorway, all of them looking as though they had seen a ghost. Evelyn's face was ashen, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. She had been searching through the study, but the moment she had heard the commotion, she had come rushing to see what had been discovered. "This room, this is where it all happened," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. This is where he died." The words hit Lily like a bolt of lightning. Her grandfather, Thomas Hawthorne, had died under mysterious circumstances. His death ruled as a heart attack. But there had always been rumors that something more sinister had occurred. But to hear Evelyn speak of it so casually, as though it were just another part of the family's dirty laundry, sent a chill down Lily's spine. "You knew?" Lily asked, her voice barely audible. Evelyn took a shaky breath, her eyes darting nervously to the others in the room. "I didn't know the details, but I knew something wasn't right. Margaret never told us everything. She kept too many secrets. But I always suspected it had something to do with Thomas's death." David stepped forward, his face clouded with suspicion. "You mean to tell me you all knew this? And you never said anything?" Charles, who had been opening the chest, froze as the full weight of what Evelyn had just said sank in. The chest, when opened, revealed something that none of them could have predicted: a series of old letters and photographs, each one more incriminating than the last. In the dim light, Lily could just make out the faded faces of a younger Margaret and Nathaniel, her estranged brother-in-law. But there, nestled between the photos, was a shocking document. A letter addressed to Margaret from someone called M, the initial alone sending a shiver down Lily's spine. "You were right, we did it. We took the insurance money and made sure he wouldn't wake up. It was the only way." Lily's breath caught in her throat. This letter, written by an anonymous hand, confirmed the unspeakable truth: Thomas Hawthorne had been murdered. But who was M, and why had Margaret kept this letter hidden for all these years? Charles reached for the letter, but Evelyn grabbed his wrist, her voice shaking. No, we can't. This is too dangerous." But David was already reading the letter aloud, his voice cracking as he stumbled over the words. "They killed him. They killed Thomas." And Margaret knew. She knew everything. The room was silent as the implications of what they had uncovered settled over them. Thomas's death wasn't a natural tragedy. It had been a cold-blooded murder, and one of them had helped to bury it, literally and figuratively. Lily, who had always felt like an outsider, suddenly understood the depths of her family's lies. This wasn't just a battle over money. This was a fight for survival, a fight to protect the secrets that had kept them all safe. Until now. And as the realization dawned on all of them, one thing became painfully clear. The fortune they were hunting for wasn't just about wealth. It was about power, the power to control the truth, to bury the past, and to keep the sins of their family hidden from the world. But the past wasn't done with them yet. And soon, none of them would be able to escape the consequences of their actions. The Hawthorne estate had become a battlefield, the hunt for the hidden fortune a mere backdrop to the deeper, darker truths that had begun to surface. As the family dug into the past, each revelation had further torn apart the fragile threads that had once held them together. The discovery of Thomas Hawthorne's murder was the final blow, shattering any illusions of unity within the family. Lily stood at the heart of it all, her every move now scrutinized, her every decision weighed with suspicion. Margaret's final message, the challenge to purge their hearts and confess their sins, had left her more exposed than ever. She had always been the outsider, the one who had been overlooked, dismissed as unimportant. But now, she was the key to everything. And as much as she wanted to walk away from the Hawthorne legacy, she knew that the answers she sought were within reach, but they came at a price. The map Margaret had left behind had led the family to a place none of them had wanted to go, the truth. And as the hours ticked by, the walls of the estate seemed to close in tighter, the pressure mounting as they all fought to protect themselves, each desperate to keep their darkest secrets from being exposed to the light. It was Charles who made the first move, though it wasn't the one anyone had expected. He had always been the one to play the game, the one to manipulate the others to get what he wanted. But as the tension grew, his patience began to wear thin. His eyes, once sharp with ambition, now burned with a dangerous mixture of desperation and rage. "I've had enough of this," Charles muttered to himself as he paced back and forth in the dimly lit hallway. "They all think they can outsmart me, but they've forgotten one thing. I'm the one who deserves this fortune." David had been watching him from a distance, his brow furrowed with concern. "What are you talking about, Charles?" Charles turned to face him, his expression hardening. "I'm talking about getting what's mine. All this nonsense about confession and atonement, it's a game, David, and I'm done playing by their rules." David's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer. "You're going to make a move, aren't you?" Charles didn't respond, but the cold glint in his eyes said everything. He was planning something, and whatever it wasn't going to be pretty. Meanwhile, Evelyn, Alexandra, and Lily were gathered in the study, poring over the documents Margaret had left behind. The tension in the room was palpable, each woman avoiding eye contact, too aware of the web of lies that had been spun between them. Evelyn, once so sure of herself, now looked fragile, as though the weight of her own guilt was finally catching up with her. "We can't let this destroy us," Evelyn whispered, her voice strained. "There's still a way out. We can make this right." But Alexandra, ever the skeptic, shook her head. "Make it right? After everything that's happened? You really think that's possible? The damage is done. We can't undo what we've done." Lily, who had been standing silently in the corner, her fingers still clutching the key she had found, felt the gravity of the situation settling heavily upon her shoulders. She had thought that uncovering the truth would set her free, but now she realized it had only shackled her further to the family's dark past. "What are we doing?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination. "Margaret wanted us to confront our sins. But what if the truth is too much for us to handle?" Alexandra scoffed. "Too much? You're the one who's been holding all the power. You're the one Margaret trusted. Don't pretend you're not enjoying this." The accusation stung, and for a moment, Lily felt the weight of the words pressing down on her. But then, she realized that Alexandra was wrong. She wasn't enjoying this. She was terrified. She had never asked for any of this. She didn't want to be the one to carry the family's sins on her shoulders. It was then that the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. The family tensed, their hearts racing. It was Charles. But this time, he wasn't alone. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she saw who was with him, David. And in David's hand was something that made her blood run cold. A gun. "You've all been too careless," Charles said, his voice cold and steady. "I've played the game long enough. But now, it's time for the final move." Lily's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was happening. Charles wasn't just playing for the fortune. He was playing for control. And he would do whatever it took to get what he wanted, even if it meant eliminating anyone who stood in his way. "You're insane," Evelyn whispered, backing away from him. "This isn't you. You can't." But Charles was already walking toward her, the gun now aimed squarely at her chest. "I can, Evelyn, and I will." David, standing beside him, looked torn, his eyes flickering between the gun and the others in the room. "Charles, this isn't the way. We can still figure this out. We don't need to do this." But Charles was beyond reasoning. His desperation had driven him to the edge, and now there was no turning back. "It's too late for that, David. You've all betrayed me. You've all betrayed the family. And now, you'll pay the price." Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward, her voice trembling with fear but also with resolve. "Charles, stop! This isn't what Margaret wanted. She wanted us to face the truth, not destroy each other." But Charles just laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. The truth? There is no truth, Lily. There's only power. And I'm taking it all. Before anyone could react, a loud crash echoed through the room as the door to the study burst open. Alexandra, who had been standing near the entrance, shoved her way through, knocking Charles off balance. In that moment of chaos, the gun fired, but it didn't hit anyone. David, his hand shaking, had managed to wrest the weapon from Charles's grasp. "You're finished," David spat, his voice full of venom. Charles stumbled back, his eyes wild with fury. "You think you can stop me? You don't know what I'm capable of." But as the family stood in the wreckage of what had been a once proud legacy, one thing was clear. The final betrayal had just begun. Charles's attempt to seize control had failed, but the damage was already done. The hunt for the fortune, once a game, had now turned into a deadly battle for survival. And as the truth continued to unravel, the family knew that the real prize was no longer the fortune Margaret had hidden away. It was the power to destroy everything they had built, to tear apart the bonds of blood and trust, and to walk away from it all with nothing but broken souls. The Hawthorne estate, once a symbol of opulence and power, now stood in ruins. The lavish rooms that had been the backdrop for years of family gatherings and hidden betrayals were now empty, their beauty tarnished by the revelations that had come to light. The fortune they had all fought for had vanished, and in its place, there was only the wreckage of a family torn apart by greed, lies, and murder. Lily stood alone in the grand foyer, staring at the portrait of Margaret that had hung for so many years, her proud smile frozen in time. Margaret had known, even in her final days, that the Hawthorne legacy was built on a foundation of sin. And now, that foundation had crumbled, just as she had planned. The will, with its cruel twist of fate, had promised riches, but it had delivered only destruction. As the final pieces of the family's secrets had been laid bare, it became clear there was no fortune to be had, no gold, no jewels, no windfall. The treasure Margaret had hidden was something far more powerful and far more devastating: the truth. Lily had been the one to unravel it all, the one who had exposed the lies, the murder, and the betrayals. But now that she had done so, she realized that the fortune she had hoped to inherit wasn't a pile of wealth, but something more elusive, something even more painful: freedom. The others had left, some in shame, some in anger, all of them shattered by the truth they could no longer escape. Evelyn had gone, her eyes hollow with guilt, unable to look at the family she had once tried so hard to protect. Charles had been escorted out in handcuffs, his pride shattered, along with his dreams of power. David had disappeared into the night, the gunshots from earlier still ringing in his ears, and Alexandra. Alexandra was gone too, her ambition consumed by the realization that there was no inheritance, no legacy to claim. And yet, amid the destruction, Lily felt a strange peace. The weight of the family's sins no longer pressed down on her, for she had been freed from the cycle of lies and deceit. The Hawthorne name, once synonymous with wealth and power, had been reduced to ashes. But for Lily, it was a beginning, not an end. She walked out into the garden, the air crisp with the scent of rain, and for the first time in her life, she felt something she had never known before: relief. Margaret had given her the greatest gift, the truth, and with it, Lily could leave this house, this family behind. As she stood on the steps, looking out over the vast estate, she realized that the true treasure was the freedom to live her life on her own terms. The inheritance had been a lie, a trap, designed to expose the darkness within each of them. Margaret had been the architect of their downfall, but she had also been the key to their liberation. In the distance, she saw the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. The world was waking up, and Lily was ready to leave it all behind. She had no need for the Hawthorne name or the wealth that came with it. All she needed was the chance to rebuild, to start fresh, and to find her own path, far from the shadows of the past. And so, with one last glance at the mansion behind her, Lily turned and walked away, the weight of the family's sins no longer burdening her shoulders. The fortune that Margaret had promised had never existed, but the true inheritance, the only one that mattered, was her freedom. The others would continue to tear each other apart, consumed by their greed and guilt. But Lily had broken free, and as the sun rose higher in the sky, she stepped into the future, her heart lighter than it had ever been. The Hawthorne legacy was gone. But Lily was free.